Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, Maryland's federal job loss climbs to 15,000 as federal government shutdown looms. Can Maryland produce sufficient electricity to power Governor Wes Moore's all-in bet on quantum computing? In national polls, why are Republicans trusted more than Democrats on economy, immigration, and political extremism? And what is the number one ranked high school in Maryland? The answer may surprise you. Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by former county council member and CEO of SkillSmart, Mike Knapp, and Secretary of the Maryland Republican Party, Mark Uncapher. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. Maryland has lost over 15,000 federal jobs this year, the most in the nation. With a federal government shutdown looming, the stakes couldn't be higher for our state's workforce. Mike, Governor Wes Moore yesterday called for the federal government to focus on providing basic functions for people rather than accepting a government shutdown. Does that mean he wants the Democrats to cave to the Republican spending plans?
Oh, I doubt he wants the Democrats to cave to the Republicans. But the reality is that we're in a situation where the Republicans have the White House and have the House and the Senate. And they also think they have a plan for how they want to, basically cut services for people. So at some point, I think the Democrats are going to have to let the will of the people play out and let people actually see what happens when you cut services and you cut subsidies and people no longer have health care or access to benefits and be able to point that in the right direction as opposed to kind of keep standing in the way. I think it's a hard part. I think it's a very difficult challenge for Democrats to accept because I think that obviously we recognize some of the benefits that these services can provide, but the reality is that the majority of the U.S. population indicated that they thought this was the right approach, and I think people need to see what that right approach isn't so right, and you kind of have to let that play out a little bit.
So I'll go to Mark on this. Mark, the Republican proposal is that there just be a straight line extension based on the current spending levels, whereas Democrats want an increase in spending, particularly on health care and some other things. So are Democrats tying, shutdown risk to health care cuts? But isn't it their excessive demands on spending that's causing this impact?
Well, I think it really goes to the political dynamics that Chuck Schumer finds himself in, is to finding a path to avoid a primary in New York in 2 years. And my hope is that a number of centrist Democrats can work together with Republicans to find a compromise path forward. As you mentioned, the maximal demands that the Democrats have put forward really are not a good starting point for those negotiations.
Well, Mike, I'm going to go back to you real quick because obviously you thought that my question, the juxtaposition of my question may be questionable. So,
well, no, I think that that the Republicans have enough challenge trying to get this passed just with all the Republicans. And I think that becomes the issue. And I think if the Republicans were clearly interested in actually trying to engage the Democrats in some meaningful way, that they could put some offers on the table to do that. And I've yet to see any indication that that's the case. And I think that, so I think the Republicans have the challenge, and so we're trying, and I think they've unfortunately have done a reasonable job of trying to cast the Democrats as to blame because we've kind of put this element out there on health care. But the reality is, I'm not sure the Republicans think the Republicans have sufficient votes.
So would you agree with Governor Moore when he calls the GOP shutdown tactics cruel?
Oh, sure, but this is what people voted for. So I think people have to see that play it out.
So, Mark, I get a sense that Democrats are playing a dangerous game here, considering that if there is a shutdown, the director of the Office of Management and Budget, Russ Voigt, gets to choose how to keep the government functioning. And, the word on the street is that there's going to be massive reductions in the civil workforce.
Well, that's certainly what a number of news accounts are reporting. I know it was in the Wall Street Journal today when we taped that, it reported on Voigt's plans on that. But to Mike's point earlier about finding a common ground, there is also reporting that a number of centrist Democrats are frankly questioning the approach that Chuck Schumer is taking of holding out for this maximum position and are looking for a possible path forward. In my recollection, it is not possible to do it just with Republican votes. Some of the policy issues involved require basically a filibuster-proof vote. And so we're hopefully calmer minds can prevail.
Well, I mean, Mike, the idea that we're in this game of economic chicken between the two parties, is not a good one,
No.
obviously. But there are those that suggest that if the Democrats compromise and cooperate with Republicans, that the base will be extremely, angry and take it out on the moderates that cross the aisle.
Oh, and that's probably true. I mean, we see that in both parties right now. You've got moderate Republicans who are fearful because they know they're going to get excoriated by the far right, and you've got moderate Democrats who are fearful they're going to get excoriated by the further left. And so there is no space right now for moderates to really play. And so how do you do that in a way that's going to be successful? And I think that if the Republicans are in fact in leadership positions, it's incumbent upon the Republicans to put forward some elements that actually can be acceptable to folks to try and get those votes. And I think, I have to agree. I actually don't think that Chuck Schumer's approach is the right approach. I'm not sure that it makes sense. I think that you're trying to get a win that you'll never get credit for. And so I think ultimately you have to let these decisions rest at the feet of the Republican Party and let them deal with the consequences.
And the last word, I'll take this. If the Republicans, if there is a shutdown and the Republicans do fire people when they come back, it's not just going to be a temporary layoff. It'll be a permanent firing, and all those people are going to have to reapply for their jobs, and they may not be able to get them.
But this is the excuse they've been looking for anyway. I mean, they've been trying to find ways to lay off more people, so this is just the excuse we're going to use today to do it.
Well, then why would Chuck Schumer or anybody in the Democratic leadership give them the ammunition to go ahead and do
it? Doesn't make a difference whether it's this one or the next thing. They'll find a way to do it because we've been doing it since we brought in Doge, and we're just trying to find ways to get rid of more people. And so the reality is that it's just, you're not giving them the ammunition. They're going to find the next excuse to do it. So,
Mark, anything to add?
No, I think you summed it up. I mean, we'll see what happens to negotiation over the next couple of days.
So let's from lost jobs, we're going to talk about green power. Let's talk about Maryland's energy future. Governor Wes Moore has bet big on quantum computing while pushing Maryland toward 100% clean energy. But PJM Interconnection, a regional electricity transmission organization in the eastern United States, including the state of Maryland, warns that the grid is fragile, as evidenced by electric generation shortfalls during peak demand periods, and the fact that electricity prices, this was a shocking figure, have spiked over 1,000% since 2023. Mike, the governor has placed a big bet on making Maryland the global capital of quantum. Those were his words. And with Microsoft and others investing, that strategy to create high-tech jobs may pay off.
It may. I mean, I think quantum is certainly a place to be looking at making some bets. But the reality is that, especially I think we as Maryland, looking at what we just talked about with the job loss, need to also be looking at what are we doubling down on that's near-term growth potential. I think quantum is great, but it's still out in the future, and we should be a player in it. And I think to your point, though, on the energy piece, and it's interesting because if you read the governor's quote, he'll talk about an all-in strategy, but really the all-in strategy is focused more solely on kind of solar and wind. And I think given where we are from a data center perspective, where we are from a quantum perspective, given where we are just from a energy supply perspective, we should be looking at truly an all-in strategy and all-in approach. We just need to be there. And if we're going to be competitive economically, Maryland needs to be looking more at the data centers, needs to be looking more at quantum, needs to be looking at more at energy-intensive industries, and we can't be in a position right now where we don't have sufficient resources.
Mark, but time and time again, Mike's point is spot on, but time and time again, the General Assembly and even local governments have resisted the development of transmission lines. They've resisted the development of new technologies that involve fossil fuels. how is this how is the state going to respond to these needs?
Well, what we need is what is called dispatchable power. That is power that is available when there is peak demand. The problem or the issue with electricity is it's a just-in-time commodity. And so having solar and wind when basically we're not at peak demand is not as helpful. In order to have dispatchable power, you really need to have more nuclear. You need basically gas and natural gas and potentially coal as well. And there's a shortfall. Maryland needs to import about 40% of its electric power. And when it's getting dispatchable power, it's drawing from out of state. And that issue is really not being addressed. Instead, the governor and the Democrats in the legislature are blaming sort of how shall I say, blaming the news, which is PJM, which passes on the costs that take place when there's a spike in demand, when there's a need for dispatchable power. Could I come back just to take a little extra time on quantum computer? Listen, the three of us all remember when $1 billion was a lot of money. And that's the amount of money that we're talking about in Maryland. Yeah. And to put this in context, in Loudoun County, the assessed value of all the data centers out there has now climbed to $40 billion. And there was something like, I think, 25 more data centers under construction. The $1 billion, which is being leveraged from some private investments as well, is a lot of money. I get that, but it is a drop in the bucket to the amount of investment that is coming into data centers, which is one of the key elements to quantum computer, that the level of investments that are being made in this sector.
Well, I have to say, Mark, you just blew my head apart when you talked about not only the amount of money involved, but also the number of data centers that are being built in Loudoun County. When just 2 days ago, I read in the Washington Post that Prince George's County is going to put a hold on the development of Landover Mall as a data center because they want to study it more. I mean, my goodness, analysis by paralysis has always been the problem with the state of Maryland and Montgomery County for that matter. So, Mike, should we go back and re-look at everything and we go back to fracking in Western Maryland and exporting LNG? What's the solution here?
Well, if I had the solution, I probably wouldn't be sitting on this show having a conversation with you two, but that notwithstanding.
Thank you. Thank you for that backhand compliment. I really appreciate that.
But no.
Wasting time with us schlubs, right?
No, I'd be out there telling everybody else what the answers were. But no, I think that the challenge really is for us to have a strategy that looks at that. I mean, look, do I like the fact that the Trump administration has basically cut down all of the solar operations that have moved forward? No, but the reality is that they have some legal rights within which to do that. I mean, Ørsted, their stock price has gone in the tank because effectively they had their wind farm off of Rhode Island that was 75% completed that was shut down by this administration. So, I mean, the reality is we have to look at those things and say, if not this, then what? And we can be right and say, well, it should be solar. Well, maybe it should be, maybe it shouldn't be. But if that's not going to happen, then what other solutions do we have on the table? And so I think we've got to be in a position to start looking across the board. I mean, I think to the extent that we can look at nuclear, that we can look at natural gas, look at those that are somewhat more renewable. I'm not a big fan of coal. I don't think we should necessarily be going in that direction. But that notwithstanding, I think we've got to be looking at kind of an all options kind of an approach because from an economic perspective, the region is trailing many of the other growth regions in the country anyway. And if you look at Maryland, you look at Montgomery County in particular, we're the tail end of the region. So right now we are way behind any place where we ought to be. And not having access to energy resources only puts us at further disadvantage.
And you're going to have the last word as we go to break. Stay tuned when we come back from the short break. National polls are showing voters trusting Republicans more, but will that translate on the local level? Stay tuned. And welcome back. A new Reuters Ipsos poll shows voters trust Republicans more on the economy, immigration, and even political extremism. Democrats, meanwhile, seem to be struggling to define their vision. Mike, according to press reports regarding the poll, the Democratic Party credibility with voters has plummeted even further since 2024. what are the Democrats focusing on other than resisting Trump?
I have the same question, actually. I think that we're really struggling. I think the Democratic Party is really struggling at trying to identify what it's for. And I think in the absence of being able to do that, it allows the president to be able to basically kind of put everything out there, flood the zone as he typically does, and appear to be for or against any variety of things. And so as a result, the Democrats not having a clear vision or playing whack-a-mole as often the case. I think one of the real challenges that we're going to have to focus on is how do we start to identify ways in which we have programs and we have communities that are providing benefits and these opportunities for their residents in real time and in real ways for all residents. And I don't think we're focusing on that. I think we're trying to be on the other side of where the president is. And you've got to have something of substance, and we don't have much of that out there right now.
Well, I mean, that's a great point that you just made. But Mark, here's the counterpoint to this. Democrats still lead, the nation on healthcare, environment, and women's rights. So they're not totally in the wilderness. How do Republicans respond to this, and how do they cross the aisle to work with Democrats on the other issues?
Well, it really is a challenge because of how polarized things are. And I look at the response to the Charlie Kirk assassination, and I'm just kind of struck by how broad the chasm is, which, I mean, not to say that the people collectively were not upset about the assassination, but just the controversy about what Charlie Kirk said or didn't say or whatever. It really is a reminder of just how split the country is. I think whichever party dominates in the future is going to be the one that can reach across with a message that sort of transcends those divisions.
And Mike, you're shaking your head in agreement. So, Democrats seem susceptible to Republican claims that they're protecting criminals, not citizens. How do they overcome that perception?
Again, I think the issue has to be not necessarily going after where the Republicans are, but to be able to define where we want to be. And so, I mean, I think to be able to say, here's where through our leadership, we've created communities that are thriving economically, that have overcome that division that you've identified, Mark, that have strong schools, that have safe streets. And I think to be able to articulate the strategies that have allowed where that has occurred and why that has occurred, I think needs to be our focus. Because I think when we can begin to point to real places where that's occurring, then you have a response. Otherwise, you're kind of just swinging at the air. And I think that that's our problem right now, is that we don't have substantive answers to put on the table, but I think they exist out there. We've just got to be able to go out and find them and really be able to talk about them.
So, Mark, we've got an election coming up very soon. And here in Montgomery County, we are the blue of the blue. How do Republicans make inroads with some of the traction that they've gained from national polls?
Well, I think one of the problems that Montgomery County Democrats have is that because this is such a blue county, there is a temptation to cater to the bluest of the blue, to cater to the base, to focus on winning the primary. And candidly, I think that drives them in those candidates in the direction to take more extreme positions that are really popular with even the blues, the lighter blues, if you will, the lighter blues and the odd purple. To stretch that metaphor beyond belief, but to basically to be a more moderate voice in the county than the voice that typically elects in the Democratic primary.
Well, it's all going to be very fascinating as we approach election year. A lot of posturing going on right now. We'll see how it shakes out. I want to talk about some good news. Well, maybe some good news, because starting this week, Maryland drivers could face fines of up to $425 for speeding.
Where's the good news in there?
Drive slower. Montgomery County is also going to add 140 new speed cameras. Mike, are Maryland drivers being used as ATMs with these steep fines because of the failure of the legislature and the governor to cut spending? The first thing Larry Hogan did when he got into office was cut the tolls and cut the fines. What's going on here?
When we first approved speed cameras or allowed speed cameras in the county, it was very defined as to where those cameras could be used. It was very specific neighborhood communities where there were very close quarters, and it was school zones. And I think people recognize that there wasn't a huge hue and cry, and the money comes in pretty easily. And so if you add a few more cameras, you make a little bit more money. And so now while there are obviously issues associated with pedestrian safety, and we need to continue to focus on that, I do think that there is a mixing of focusing on pedestrian safety and generating additional revenue. And I think we've commingled that, and I think the fact that we're generating a lot of additional revenue, focusing on pedestrian safety, is a happy outcome for many people who've made policy decisions.
So, Mark, it doesn't come as a surprise when I say, shouldn't lawmakers be fixing roads instead of taxing drivers?
That would be a good start, and I would add to that so many lanes that could be put into service. Particularly, we obviously talked about the additional lanes that could have been put in on the Beltway under the old Hogan proposal, and the lanes that have been taken out of service because of bike lanes. There's sort of less room for drivers to get through.
Well, let's talk. And there's actually may be some good news, Mike. Several Maryland high schools made the U.S. News and Report list of best high schools. And while Montgomery County schools, Whitman, Wooten, Poolesville, and Churchill dominated the top spots here in the state, it was Eastern Tech in Baltimore that was the highest rated nationally at number 125 and number one in the state of Maryland. So, Mark, what's wrong with our priorities on our education here in Montgomery County?
Well, I was a little head scratching about Eastern Tech, and I candidly just don't know enough about it. I would point out that I've never seen them show up quite so high in the past. I am familiar with Whitman, son-in-law and daughter who went there, but I would point out that they live out of state now. And that really is one of the issues that we have with our education, is that we are training so many people, but we're not creating jobs for them to stay in the state.
Yeah, Mike, I won't, go on and on, but I know recent, surveys show that, test scores have declined here in Montgomery County. We were once at the upper echelons of the national rankings, and so we need to refocus our energies, as you well know.
Oh, no, we do. And I think the new superintendent is focusing in on that. But I mean, it has been a while. We have been adrift for a number of years. And so the reality is it's going to take some time for us to get back on the path that we need to be on. And so I see good things. I hear good things. So the challenge is going to be to identify kind of some of those key benchmarks to see are we moving in the right direction. And I would observe that while test scores have gone down in Montgomery County, I was just reading an article earlier today where, quite honestly, test scores have gone down everywhere. And so we really need to, we as a collective need to be doubling down on how we actually figure about education and really orient our students to be able to excel so they can move into those jobs and take us to the next, move us to the next level.
And that's why we need to go to a voucher system. Stay tuned for Parting Shots.
Jordan knows he shouldn't eat this entire bowl of nachos, but tonight he's earned that right, because a few hours ago in the middle of happy hour, he recognized a sign, not from the gods or a bolt of lightning, but from a double heart, a kissy face, and a fourth ha in ha ha ha. That's when Jordan knew he was buzzed. So when it was time to go, he got a ride home instead of driving. Be a legend like Jordan. Recognize your buzzed warning signs and get a ride home. Buzz driving is drunk driving.
When I first saw Turtle, my heart was full. Not anything but lonely.
We had this deep connection, this heart connection.
He just wants to be close to you and part of your life.
Every day with Turtle is a perfect day.
When I'm holding her, it makes me feel calmer.
I think everything he does shows how much he loves us.
When we adopt a shelter pet,
we discover
they're a little bit of a lot of things,
but they're all pure love.
Welcome back. Now with Parting Shots, Mark Uncapher.
Well, I'm hoping that by the time many people will listen to this show, which is a little later than when it first airs, that cooler minds can prevail, and the compromise that we talked about earlier in the show can help reach an agreement on federal budget, and we can avoid a shutdown.
Thank you, Mark. Mike Knapp, your parting shot.
Well, I've been kind of consistent on this, and I just know that there are lots of folks out there in our community who are suffering as a result of economic challenges, legal challenges, a variety of things. And so I would just encourage folks in your neighborhood and in your broader community to look for opportunities to try and give back, whether that's providing food to a local shelter, local food pantry, just to be aware and to look and try to be kind and help where you can.
Thank you. I want to thank you both for being here. Maryland faces, we've covered a lot of topics tonight. Maryland faces job cuts, energy challenges, shifting voter trust, new laws, school disparity. But it's this debate that shapes our state's future. So thank you, panel, for being here. And I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.